Well, let's get straight into it then. So welcome everyone to this 2:30 p.m. session entitled Not Your Keys, Not Your NFTs. My name is Kelsie Nabben. I'm a researcher at RMIT University Blockchain Innovation Hub, as well as a board member at Blockchain Australia. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Jenny Lee from Nansen AI, Paul Gerhardt from KONG.land, Jonathan Hooker from Holon Global, and Sean Dudley from Animoca. Welcome, everyone. So I think to frame the discussion, Not Your Keys, Not Your NFTs really refers to the kind of well-known Bitcoin slogan about not your keys, not your coins. And we want to traverse a couple of main points here. So the first was actually brought up in the technical panel slightly earlier today, and they started talking about this idea of metadata, and someone actually mentioned not your metadata, not your NFTs. So first, I'm really interested in data persistence and touching on that. And the second that was actually mentioned on that panel is around operational security. And for this conversation, that really includes secure key management as well. And so with so much value in these things and so much transparency in public blockchain networks, how do you secure your NFTs? And so with that question, I'm going to throw to Jenny from Nansen AI to tell us a little bit more about what data is actually available on a public blockchain network and what can be known about who owns the NFTs. Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kelsie, for your question. So yeah, as you mentioned, there's a lot of transparency on public blockchain. We can look at who is doing what on chain in terms of the tokens, NFTs they're buying and selling at what price, right from the start of the smart contract being deployed. So at Nansen, we have actually labeled over 100 million Ethereum addresses, such as crypto exchanges, DeFi protocols, crypto funds, whales, and also celebrities who are using NFTs as their social media profile pictures. So you can really gain lots of insights into what people are actually doing on chain. And one of the most popular features on Nansen NFT dashboard is actually to show you the activities of notable buyers who are the more savvy and successful crypto investors. So you can also do your own due diligence and decide if you would like to copy their trading strategies. And speaking of notable buyers, I think we have to mention Pranksy, who's a very, very seasoned and successful NFT collector. So Pranksy has bought more than 15,000 NFTs, and he still holds 12,000 of them, including many popular NFT collections that probably many of you know, such as Art Blocks, CryptoKitties, Sandbox Land, World of Women, and Pranksy has also been topping the profit leaderboard for a very long time. He has made over 4,000 ETH in profit, which is around $12 million at the moment, just by buying and selling NFTs.
That's quite incredible insights. And I think even the amount of people that you've been able to match kind of identities to NFTs is quite interesting. And I guess that brings us to this question about secure key management around the ownership of these assets. So Paul, I'd love to hear from you in terms of, as part of this kind of metaverse play and dabbling with NFTs yourself as part of KONG.land, how are you guys addressing key ownership in relation to NFTs?
Yeah, so I think one of the ways we think about it is what is the root of trust for these systems? What is the core foundational mechanism from which we establish a known truth and then build up layers of trust on top of that? And with computers, that starts with the boot up process, and that starts with where you have your root signing key. So traditionally with something like an iPhone, you have a root chip that validates that the most basic mechanism that you're using to boot up that computer is matches the code that you said that you signed on there. And this concept is called in semiconductor engineering is called a secure element. So our focus for the past 12 years is how we can create secure elements that have a mix of properties that allow them to be very fungible, so you can trade them amongst people, but also can be authenticated either on chain or attached to physical assets. And it's a fairly challenging problem because you don't want these chips to be reprogrammable. You actually want them to act like a real fingerprint and be assigned at birth or at genesis. So we went down this road of trying to solve this problem in a number of verticals. So we started in 2007 solving this for door locks, and transitioned this in 2015 to this project called the DAO with Ethereum, which was nominally created by a sub-venture called Slockit. And we were manufacturing the door locks for that venture. And as the space has matured and we've kind of had this formation of ERC20s, we've transitioned those chips to be able to store ERC20s or fungible tokens. So one of the more fun projects we made was actually minting cash instruments that had physical secure element chips on there and had a face value, so you can authenticate that this cash instrument that you have normally printed in your basement that would be very sketchy actually has the value of the tokens stored on there. And then as NFTs began to get more popular, we scaled the capability of that silicon to work with ERC 721s, which have slightly more nuanced properties as far as the metadata around owning and ownership. And we think of it more like a title for ownership, so, or a deed. So how you would have a title for high value goods like your property or your car, but now you can essentially have titles issued for all of your assets, particularly high net worth assets like virtual goods or physical goods. And the core mechanism we enable there is actually being able to bridge a smart contract title with a physical asset in a way that it can't be cloned or it can't be duplicated, and you can attest that it's authentic. And there's no solutions on the market that tick a number of the essential properties of that up until we figured out an approach here. So we thought this good shouldn't be something that is a private company. It should actually be a commons, and we've created a new entity to maintain that commons. So traditionally, states maintain commons for their participants. So we created a new state. Well, myself and 131 of my mates have created a new state called KONG.land to facilitate the maintenance of this commons of linking these virtual contracts to these physical assets, and the proceeds from that towards the development of more sophisticated silicon that is blockchain forward and crypto forward, as opposed to sovereign entity forward. And that we've launched over the past few years, starting with the cash and then now the sovereignty, and that's at KONG.land. So we're excited to be pushing that initiative forward.
Cool, that's a very interesting approach to key management, and props for getting the word mate in there and for joining quite late in your locale. Jonathan, I'd like to throw to you next in terms of some of the details around metadata. So Holon Global are participants in the IPFS ecosystem, and I'm very curious as to how IPFS as a content storage network relates to NFTs, and actually some of the kind of misconstrued assumptions as well about storing NFTs on IPFS, because I know that there's multiple ways to store and access content through the browser as well as running a node. And then my question is kind of who maintains that infrastructure in the long term?
Okay, cool. Thanks very much for inviting me today. I really appreciate it. So yeah, so Holon, we are the largest IPFS Filecoin kind of operator in Oceania. We're building out our cloud storage system over the next couple of years. So if we get to IPFS, realistically, today's data storage systems aren't really prepped for our verifiable, immutable internet of the future. Today, NFTs are built on very fragile data storage systems. So with an NFT asset, you really want to be able to sell that digital thing, that contract, so it has a unique address on the internet. IPFS solves this problem with a number of technologies called IPLD, CIDs, content routing. There's a number of things that are underneath IPFS, which gives a digital asset a digital fingerprint on the internet. So high-level IPFS kind of imports, names, finds, and fetches data. This is really important when you're buying your NBA Topshop cards. You want to be really important that that is the only one in the world and you own it, right? So with IPFS isn't persistent out of the box. Really, IPFS node, you have to run it and then it uploads your data to that node. And anybody can run a node. That's really easy. But really, the founders of IPFS, Protocol Labs, they built a new network called Filecoin, which is persistent verifiable data storage. Now, you can actually get IPFS to be a persistent network by running it in a DAO structure, i.e., 50 or let's say 500 people around the world all run the same node, and you have this thing called IPFS cluster, and it makes sure all the nodes are in sync. That would be a persistent data network. So realistically, if you are storing NFT assets, what you really want is a hot CDN-like thing, which is IPFS in a DAO structure. And you really want a cold, immutable, verifiable backup system, which is Filecoin.
Got it. So I'll TLDR that for the audience. And you're saying that you want something accessible where people can send and receive content, and then you want a really robust backup. And IPFS is one way to do that, and including the Filecoin layer, which is the cryptocurrency kind of incentives for maintaining that storage, the storage of that content.
Yeah, so there's really three things at play. There's speed to download, there's persistence of the data, and cost to serve and store the data. And so you really got to think about those things as you kind of, as you think about verifiable, immutable NFTs.
Cool. Maybe we can come back to what sort of resources people can access when they're considering some NFTs to research this a bit in a bit more depth. Sean, coming to you, Animoca is focused on branded blockchain games and holds an NFT investment portfolio. How do you judge the reliability of an NFT's metadata? What are you looking for?
So one of the main benefits of blockchain, or at least like what we look for and what is useful for us is, and this is useful for everybody, so it's kind of understand that not only are the tokens on chain and the transactions on chain, but also the contracts where those tokens are coming from are also very visible, right? They're not always the most readable things, but there's kind of a format and understanding of what that means. And then I think kind of like for ourselves, we kind of also understand, or at least we're able to kind of, we make a choice as to what is valuable in regards to metadata, right? And I think like one of the things that, and it's the easiest thing, and it probably helped the fact that art blew up as it did, that people think metadata and they think it's the image, right? But that's not necessarily the case, right? The metadata is actually something that is generally not readable, or no one bothers to read it, but that is the immutable part. That's the part that persists. And it's basically saying, okay, as we come in and we kind of, if there are NFTs or people are building platforms that we're interested in, what is actually on-chain metadata? And usually that means, in the most basic term, it stores some form of map, right? So for example, the way that we have created NFTs in the past is that our token ID is essentially the metadata in a map form, right? Because the actual readable data is never, it's incredibly rare that there's ever any readable data on chain. It's just understanding what is on the token and what is that metadata. Because ultimately, when it comes to Like, one of the things that's fascinating for us is interoperability and basically reinterpretation and abstraction of tokens, and ways that you can kind of add value to an NFT from one ecosystem into another. And generally speaking, the visual part of the metadata that will persist is very rarely going to be the one that you visualize inside an alternate experience, right? So for example, if we wanted to add some form of functionality inside one of our racing games for axes, they wouldn't appear using the axis kind of visual format, right? It would be a completely separate rendering. But what we're doing is that we're looking at and utilizing the true metadata, which is what's on the token itself. And as there is more and more interoperability added, like the visual metadata is a part, an asset that is tied to the token. But the more important data, the stuff that people will be able to get more flexibility from, is truly what is on chain, right? So I think one of the things for us is when we look at these projects, we look at, okay, what is on chain and what is kind of something that we can leverage as it being on chain. And I think as well, some of the things that we're interested in and what we're looking at is how some of the other blockchains, since we started moving and not developing so much on Ethereum, is how the kind of the expense of operations and applying certain things on chain has changed, right? And I think some of the stuff that we think about what goes on chain, what doesn't, how is that interpreted, how is it visualized, is going to change as more chains kind of come into this space and say, okay, we're a blockchain that specializes in actually having readable on-chain data for you. And maybe you don't actually use that blockchain for all your transactions, but you use it for an aspect of what you're trying to run as a product, right? So mostly what's important to us when we look at stuff is obviously everybody has the benefit of looking exactly at what these contracts are when people are issuing tokens, but also what does it mean as having on-chain data? And we know it's not going to be the image. And I think it's important that everybody kind of understands that is the case, but there's a richness and kind of an integral part of the token that does exist on chain. It's just understanding what that is.
That's a fascinating insight about how NFTs will appear in other virtual spaces, so the interoperability play. And also I know something that was mentioned earlier today was around the kind of collateralization or recollateralization of NFT assets, which is fascinating. Jenny, I can see you're nodding your head, and I guess from your dashboard purview, what trends do you think are driving NFT ownership?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think in general, more and more people start to recognize that NFT is a digital asset that they can, own and trade anytime from anywhere with almost anyone in the world. And buying an NFT is a way to support, the artist, musician, or sports person that you like. But at the same time, it's also to join a community that you enjoy hanging out with, or use an NFT as your social media profile picture, such as on Twitter. But when it comes to ownership, NFT ownership, especially in terms of unique addresses, I think gaming and metaverse, as you have mentioned, are definitely leading the trend. For example, like we can see for Axie Infinity, which is a very, very popular play to earn blockchain game, has over 1.9 million wallet addresses. So if these wallets are one-to-one to users, they form the population of a very large city or a small country. As Jeff, the co-founder of Axie Infinity, mentioned, actually 50% of their players didn't have crypto before playing Axie, and 25% of them didn't have a bank account. So I think Axie has played a very, very significant role to bank the unbanked. It's also worth noting that currently Axie Infinity has more than 5,000 ETH, which is about $15 million in sales volume per day, which is really mind-blowing, to say the least.
Thanks for that. And I think there'll be further insights on Axie Infinity from Leah Callan-Butler that spends some time in the Philippines later today.
Yeah.
It's a good pre-plug for that. Paul, could you speak a little bit more about how you're able to use these silo microchips and NFTs to tie digital and physical goods?
Yeah, of course. Just as Journey was pointing out with Axie Infinity, you find these sort of Trojan horse use cases to onboard new people into crypto. And it's surprising because normally the interface for Axie is a video game, but really there's all this magic that's happening behind the scenes that people are using crypto for the first time and they're not even aware of it. And I love that part of where we are in the development and maturation of the crypto life cycle, because it feels like that's the inflection point where this is starting to click with real world societies. So for us, we've been focusing on this bridge of what are the use cases where physical crypto is killer. And naively, we thought crypto starts with cash, and we thought, okay, there's just a lot of cash instruments that are printed every day. So maybe it's cash, and we've had quite a large run of production cash notes across different currencies, and we've seen some success there. And likewise, we have a identity card product that's blockchain based, and there's been some adoption there. But by far, the thing that surprised us most that we did not see coming was this world of fashion. And there's this insatiable demand to essentially put crypto authenticated hardware wallets into articles of clothing, whether it's in the soft tag of the garment or in the sales tag at the point of sale. But it solves all of these problems with counterfeiting or authentication or one-of-one rarity that fundamentally these are nothing new. These are problems we as a culture have both valued and struggled with for hundreds of years, and seeing crypto slot into such a natural role in this ecosystem has been sort of mind-blowing. Okay, yes, like fundamentally fashion articles are just another manifestation of a unique and rare instance or good or physical object that people want to show off in the real world and want to know that it came from a trusted source. And if you kind of analogize it to the web, it's like if you go to your bank, you want to know that the bank website that you're going to is the real bank website. It's just like when you go purchase real physical goods, you want to have this trust that this article is the real good that you're purchasing. And for a long time, we just kind of papered over that because we didn't have good solutions there. But thanks to cryptographic technology, we can actually attest this whole process from start to finish, but then also have really, really fun things that we can do with it now, because now these physical articles are becoming smart articles. You're effectively being able to have this bridge go two ways, where it's not just the manufacturer saying this is real, but now you're having users that wear that merchandise that are able to interact back with the manufacturer, whether it's to get into an exclusive party or to unlock a rare item in a video game, or basically these wearable goods are effectively smart contracts in themselves, and anything that you can do with a smart contract, you can now do with these physical assets. And not to get too excited and too worked up here, but I get really excited by this idea that, okay, now our physical assets we can collateralize and we can put into these exotic financial instruments, but like it would previously be like unimaginable or unobtainable, but like anybody can just click a button and now they've taken out a loan against their rare 1995 Air Force Ones or some rare art piece that they have. And I just love how quickly the space is moving. And even if like we're not directly building those contracts, that we're enabling that bridge between these worlds, it's fascinating seeing people making a hop from one physical good to the metaverse and then back to a physical good. And then it's this full cycle loop that's going around and around and spinning. And I didn't anticipate that once we enabled these bridges, you would have two-way traffic going across the bridge. But of course, the traffic's going to be two-way, and it's super thrilling to see. And I basically have a grin on my face every day somebody posts some new cool thing on GitHub that is blowing my mind when it comes to this physical stuff. So it's really a super joy to work in.
Endless possibilities. Jonathan, coming back to the idea you mentioned around the governance of NFT metadata, I guess, in this proposal of a DAO type structure to manage a cluster of nodes on the IPFS network. Do you know anyone that's doing that? Could you talk to that a little bit more?
Yes, it's interesting. There's not many. There really isn't anybody doing it at the moment. It's all being talked about, like in different communities. How do we move to the next step? You know, ultimately, if you look at Filecoin, they've got their governance baked in at a blockchain level because they've got 3,000 storage providers, but it's not very good at delivering data really quickly, like a hot CDN. So I think this DAO IPFS conversation will come out of the Filecoin community, because you just think of it as an extra service over the top of Filecoin. One of the things I always play with as well is like, how many partners do you really need to make something persistent and immutable? As we've seen recently from the SEC moves, everybody thinks they're, you know, above the law until the hammer comes down. So I think you really have to have thousands of IPFS nodes running for it to be truly persistent and immutable, you know, and persistent, really, basically. So yeah, I think it's going to be a big initiative. Like, governance for data is, you know, is the fundamental railroad for all the other Web3 applications, right? Like, DeFi contracts aren't immutable if they're served up from Amazon Cloudflare, right? So this is the next step, and I think that this is going to get solved in the next couple of years. There's just like, how do you do it on a regulatory level, and also how do you have governance for that data so you have you have only good content only. But yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting time for data, I think.
Yeah, that's excellent. There's some fantastic questions being thrown up in the chat. However, we are very limited for time. And so rather than sorting through those, I just want to do a quick whip in terms of good resources we can point people to, or resources to learn more. So mine is going to be NFT.storage, which is a Protocol Labs initiative talking about how the IPFS network can sort of better serve that metadata need. Sean, I'll throw to you.
Sure. So I mean, like, it's less resource, but I think it's just kind of do basic 101 and understand what metadata is. It's kind of touching on the stuff that I mentioned before, where it's kind of visual side is metadata, but then the information, the attributes of whatever you're getting is metadata, and how much of that, if it is using IPFS, how much of that or what of that is on IPFS, what of that is being centralized, like stored in a centralized manner. So it's just being familiar with kind of not just taking blanket terms or just looking at what is the easiest thing to see and consider, okay, now that's the important part, the visual part, but actually understanding what both those parts are. And we are, just before we kind of wrap up, I know it's super close, but everybody will be able to get an idea of what some of our structured metadata looks like, because we're going to be giving away Rev Racing themed NFT Fest cars to all attendees, so they can get those and check out exactly how we structure our metadata on those tokens, and then how we interpret that metadata when it actually goes inside a client as well. So
awesome. Paul, to you for 30 seconds, and then we're going to wrap up. And anyone that's had questions in the Q&A, I do encourage you to reach out via Twitter or Discord or the websites of any of these great folk.
KONG.land is where you can learn about where to join this metaverse network state where we're managing this commons of the chips. ARX.org has got some technical information on how one can integrate these chips and the security properties of those chips, including the white paper on it. And then our Discord has got a huge community of people that will get you up to speed on how you can actually connect physical goods to the metaverse in a secure way, so that that bridge doesn't get broken when you transfer those goods after the fact when you do NFT exchanges.
Thanks. Jenny, final words from you?
I think this is probably from a consumer perspective. I think some of the resources that personally I will recommend to gaining insights on, you know, what's happening, what's trending, is that Radar, Crypto Slam. Of course, you're most welcome to follow us on Twitter at Nansen AI. Can learn everything about, you know, what's hot in NFTs. Thank you.
Awesome. Super appreciate each of your time. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in, as well as the organizers of this event. It's been a real pleasure, and make sure you stay on for the next session. Thanks.